So today we're going to be talking about some new information given by Katee Sackhoff, but first of all, Dave Filoni has made some comments about his 2026 Star Wars movie, the Mandoverse film, continuing the story of the Ahsoka show and the Mandalorian, inspired in part by Heir to the Empire. Speaking with Entertainment Weekly, Dave says, quote, "It's a clamoring of characters saying, how do I get in this picture? And that's what John and I have been trying to figure out. In other words, there's lots of characters that make up the Mandoverse, which ones should be included? Fennec Shand, Boba Fett, Bo-Katan, of course Ahsoka, Thrawn, Din Djarin, Grogu. It's a big ensemble, and they have to figure out which ones to keep in and which they have to exclude. I would say of all 3 Star Wars movies announced at Star Wars Celebration, this one has the most pressure to get right." Now, even though Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni wouldn't say which characters are going to show up, there are some obvious ones, those who've been primary in the Mandoverse so far, in The Mandalorian, in the Book of Boba Fett, in the Ahsoka show, maybe Skeleton Crew. But here's the most exciting bit, they do say they're gonna use some older sources, some which are non-canon, so we might see Mara Jade, some other characters from the Zahn trilogy. They want to bring it all together if those characters are appropriate. Dave says that various Star Wars stories are not off limits, including spin-off books, comics, even those that are not part of the Disney canon. Clearly there are decisions that have to be made to fit it all together, but for us, I think one thing we're in agreement about is that the characters, as special as they are, it's the story that has to drive those characters, not the characters first. So if the story calls for it, we could see some aspects of the EU. They've already started this with Captain Pellaeon. He was already made canon in Star Wars Rebels and a couple of other sources, but he did appear on screen in The Mandalorian Season 3 Chapter 23. And I know there are lots of Star Wars fans who want to see characters like Mara Jade and others from the old expanded universe that was decanonized when Disney took over. Coming from an animation background, it's going to be interesting to see what Dave can do with the Ahsoka show. We know he's done great work on The Mandalorian, but an entire show that's written by him is going to be fascinating to see. And so now, my dear friends, let's talk about Katee Sackhoff. In a new interview, she teases we might see more Bo stories to come. Is she hinting at her own series, which has been rumoured for a while? Check it out.
I think it would largely also depend on what the focus was, right? And what the story was. There is more than enough backstory and current story of the Mandalorians as a people and Bo to do a show.
Now, Bo-Katan did have a prominent role in the 3rd season. For many Star Wars fans, this was a story arc she started in the Clone Wars through to Star Wars Rebels, Mando Season 2 with the Heiress, all the way up to the finale, and of course now in Season 3, she was the star. Some Star Wars fans say that Din Djarin and Grogu were sidelined, and in a way, if they wanted to tell Bo-Katan's story of ruling Mandalore, they would have to be. And while I do think Din Djarin and Grogu do have a lot more potential that's not been explored, that is going to happen in Season 4, but Season 3 really was Bo-Katan's season. A lot of us thought she's going to challenge Din for the Darksaber, but a plot convenience relating to the big spider droid in the mines of Mandalore solved that problem. Bo-Katan could legitimately have a claim without having to face Mando. She fought his captor, which made her the rightful ruler of Mandalore, and I really am happy for her. Then, in her fight with Moff Gideon on Mandalore, the Darksaber was destroyed. This divisive weapon was not a good thing for the Mandalorian people, but at that stage, Bo already proved herself, and now they can start afresh. So a Bo-Katan series that really explores what the Mandalorians now get up to, some new threats to the homeworld and the villains. Other remnants are going to find out that Moff Gideon was presumably killed, so they're going to want revenge. And the last thing they want, and I'm talking about Thrawn and Hux Pellaeon, the last thing they want is an autonomous Mandalore, one which could pose a threat, especially if they ally themselves with the New Republic. And remember, they have Plaisir 15 as allies. I know a lot of fans didn't like that episode, and it did seem in some ways a bit throwaway. I do think it's going to come full circle. They knighted Grogu, they gave Bo the key, and they've allied themselves with Mandalore once it's restored, which by the way is now. So Bo-Katan series could explore all of those things. A lot of the stories in Season 3 were really fun, but I do appreciate Bo-Katan's development that she's got to that point. She's put her failures of her past behind her. So it's a new age for Mandalore, and Bo-Katan was at the center. And so now, my dear friends, Katee Sackhoff has talked about the various kinds of Star Wars fans and how they've reacted to Bo-Katan, some of which are a little bit on the naughty side. But this has been making the rounds. I've seen it in a few places within the fandom, and it sparked a lot of conversation. It's rather lighthearted. This has nothing to do with the story of Mando itself, but rather how Star Wars fans engage with actors. in a fantastic new interview with Christian Harloff, and I do recommend you go check that out. So at one point during the conversation, Katee Sackhoff hilariously pointed out the percentages of Star Wars fans who had different reactions to Bo-Katan's involvement in Season 3, with her jokingly estimating that 2% of diehards want the character to... The quote was part of the Star Wars actress's explanation of how she usually rants to her husband about the collective reactions of fans towards Bo-Katan, and it must be frustrating for her. And I don't mean, what she's talking about here, but rather those fans who really just dismiss her from the outset, and I did see a lot of fans do that. I understand you want the season to be about Din Djarin, I get he's the main character, he's the reason you're invested, Grogu as well, but I don't think Bo-Katan's story warranted that response. It was a solid story, and Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau have been very transparent in saying this is a part of her story that builds off the Clone Wars and Rebels, so those shows really influenced The Mandalorian, and even if you've never seen those, her story in Season 3, to me at least, made a lot of sense. So here's a quote. My husband gets so mad at me because I'll go on social media and I'll be like, everybody f***ing hates me. Everybody hates me. They're talking about how stupid this is. This person says that I don't know anything. This person says that watching me act is like watching paint dry. This person says that Katee can't act her way out of a paper bag. And he's like, how many people have said that? How many people? I'm like, all of them. And she brings up a really good point here. When you're on social media, whether you have a small following or you're as huge as Katee is, and she has a big following of fans, you will have people who don't like you, and it can sometimes feel as though that everyone hates you. But that's not the case. I love Katee Sackhoff. Many people do. She really sold me on the character both with her voice in the animated shows, but also in Mando. And I really hope she appears in Ahsoka and knows just how much fans appreciate her work. I think she's a fantastic actress. I don't think it warrants that kind of reaction, the ones saying that they hate her. But it can be so tempting to just focus on the negativity. It's a normal human reaction to think that because a few people have said something, even if they're not the majority, they are the ones making a lot of noise, and therefore you internalize that. So it is sad she thinks a lot of people hate her. I want to say I love Bo-Katan and I love Katee. So moving on, Sackhoff later laughed about how acknowledging the simping part of the fan base was crucial to explaining the breadth of the fan response to Bo-Katan as a character. And you're always going to have that with characters in Star Wars. Carrie Fisher faced this in Return of the Jedi with the Jabba the Hutt slave layer outfit. And Katee says, I'm trying to give him, and she's talking about her husband, the whole scope of what we're dealing with here. These are the numbers, this is what we're dealing with. I broke it down for him. He was like, alright, that's true. The Bo-Katan actress also opened up about how art is subjective, noting that not everyone will always love what you do. And that's so true. Especially in Star Wars, our fan base is so diverse, it's so big. You have people from all walks of life, all opinions, all ranges of views on the world, and so their perception of what Star Wars should be is going to be different. Some fans absolutely hated The Last Jedi, others loved it. Some fans didn't like the Lizzo and Jack Black episode of Mando Season 3, others thought it was one of the best. So we shouldn't bash people for their opinions, as long as they're not, derogatory, as long as they're not personal attacks. I think it's perfectly valid to criticize art, and she acknowledges that with Bo-Katan. She says art is subjective. Not everyone is always going to love what you do, and we would be stupid if we thought that everyone would like us, like the work we do, like our talent, and like the stuff that we do, and you just gotta let it go. And she's absolutely right. I would say that Katee Sackhoff has become one of my favourite actors in all of Star Wars. The director who covered this say, it isn't surprising there are naughty and thirsty Star Wars fans holding their collective breath whenever Bo-Katan shows up on their screens, considering how The Mandalorian Season 3 successfully elevated Katee's character. I like the use of the word successfully, because I do think that was a huge highlight of the show. They made it work. I know it's a lot to adjust to, considering we went from the adventures of Din and Grogu to now having a show that has changed a lot. But as I say, if you didn't like that, I do think Season 4 is going to give us a lot of what we're used to from the first two seasons. Just Din and Grogu, in this case working for the New Republic, taking on some bounty hunting jobs, coming across different remnants, different factions of the remnant, and in turn, fans get to see more of the galaxy at this time, which I think is one of the most fascinating periods of the timeline. And as someone who's not been the biggest fan of some of the decisions in the third season, I still have great hope it's going to get so much better. And I say that because I trust storytelling. I trust the idea of letting stories mature, letting stories develop and build. Sometimes they take a few detours, but it doesn't mean they can't get back on track and give us what we love. So we've got to think long term. But share your thoughts on this in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give me a big fat thumbs up, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next one. May the Force be with you always.